Okay, guys, welcome back to this channel, this tactical intellectual channel. I did a part one on psychology of indoctrination. So this video here today will be part two of the psychology of indoctrination. And it all means something to tie it back into my historical content. I just had to take a little pause and just let you guys know the idea behind me using the psychology series and what it's for, because I'm about to, well, going forward, I am about to really get into some controversial information with with strong sources, mind you. But um in our modern day times, the idea is so diametrically opposed to what the truth is, you know, from the sources that I will present. So I just wanted to let you know, hey, yeah, we as humans, we can be indoctrinated quite easily. We can be manipulated quite easily. So we have to have a solid foundation of truth to actually go by in our life, so that we won't be easily swayed to and fro, because that's definitely happening. And don't think it's not, because they spend what billions in advertising. They study behavior in humans, man. They also study different cultures. They study different people groups. They study ethnicities. They pour so much money into this stuff. But you know what? I'm doing so much speaking, but it's not even about me. Let's go on to the video here, and this is about indoctrination versus education. Let the man speak, not me. Okay, you guys enjoy the video. Here we go.
My name is Jason Stanley. I'm a teacher in the philosophy department here at Yale University, and the Jacob Urofsky Professor of Philosophy. I want to talk about education versus indoctrination, a topic that, for philosophers, is central to our discipline. It goes back to Plato's Republic, who calls for education as the solution to ideology. However, our education system has often been the source of ideology and not the solution, has far too often been the source of ideology and not the solution.
This is the interesting thing right here, how originally education was supposed to be the solution to ideology, but we noticed that a paradox had popped up. The education system has been the source of ideology instead of the solution, so they flipped it. Definitely not for the best, but for the worse.
And the history of our education system clearly reveals this. You might think it's just recent that education is the site, education school boards are the site of ideological battle. Education has always been the site of ideological battle. In the United States, a key book is Edward Ross's 1901 book, Social Control. The title tells you about the topic. Ross is wondering what the best way is to affect social control of the masses by the elite. 1900 to 1920 is a very dark time in our nation's history. And Ross concludes that the best way to impose social control is via the education system. He points out that churches don't require mandatory attendance. He points out that that voluntary clubs don't either. Schools, however, one can require all children to go to schools. You can take them away from the ideological formations they have at home, and you can expose them the whole day to a set of ideas. And the set of ideas can be set from above. So a very important era in our nation is 1900 to 1920.
Now, this book right here, Social Control, is another one to really check out if you can. Give that book a good look or a good read. Okay, now, I am glad he mentioned this. This is the progressive era, quote unquote, and it has really been seen to be progressive towards a certain group of people. That's what we're going to really delve into in later videos. Now, the best way to implement social control is definitely to teach distorted history via the educational system. I'm glad he admitted that right there. That's so true. Now, when it comes to schooling, that's something that is required right there. Whereas a club, social club, or a church is not required. Now, you know what else is required? And I'm glad he brought this out. The attendance. School attendance is something that's mandatory, whereas the club attendance and the church attendance, that's not mandatory right there. So they can get to you that way right here. So you can see when it comes to indoctrination, you can indoctrinate. That's basically what he's saying here. You can indoctrinate people when they are required to attend a certain arena or forum, for lack of a better term.
When the National Education Association, which was crafted by people influenced by Ross, like David Sneddon, did a series of panels over 6 to 10 years, culminating in the 1917 Secondary Principles of Cardinal Education, which creates our public school system. For instance, it divides middle school from public school and elementary school. And crucially, it creates social studies. Social studies was decided in the so-called social studies history wars as the way to go in our education system. So the historians wanted history taught. What is history? History is the detailed recounting of what happened. And what happened contains multiple perspectives on what happened. It contains the Native American perspective on what happens. It contains the African American perspective on what happens. It contains the perspective of disabled people, of Irish American immigrants, of women. But it was decided that something else was going to be taught in our schools. What was going to be taught in our schools was a uniform narrative of American identity. A uniform narrative of American identity precludes, by its very character, multiple perspectives. And you can bet that if you're going to tell a uniform narrative of American identity determined by the National Education Association, by the NEA, it's not going to be a view from any traditionally marginalized group. It is not going to be the Native American view. That will not be the uniform narrative.
Now, the creation of social studies, that's very interesting that they called it social studies instead of just education, historical education. But I like how he mentioned how historians, they had their account versus a uniform narrative of American identification. That was the, I guess, point of contention right there. So the uniform narrative is flawed because it's actually only from one view, not multiple views. So the NEA, or National Education Association, they wasn't having it, man. They wasn't going to have multiple viewpoints being told. They wanted that uniform nature or aspect of it being taught.
Now, an official reason, something that our education systems have always responded to, was the desire to assimilate immigrant groups. So the idea was to tell a story of American education that gave students the sense of a uniform American identity, the glories of American empire. And John Dewey, the great philosopher, unfortunately was caught into this narrative because he came down on the side of social studies because he thought the goal of social studies should be to together construct an identity, a uniform identity. He didn't realize that social studies was in fact going to be used as a way to impose an identity from the top as a method of social control. So we need to, when theorizing about education, education is the foundation of any democracy. Without an education that prepares you to take part in policy discussions, and policy discussions include things like redress for past wrongs, for which you need to know about the history of marginalized groups. We need an education system that gives us multiple perspectives. And unfortunately, the American education system for too long has not done that.
So really the end goal or the desire was to assimilate, and that really took precedence over telling a truthful historical version of accounts as they actually happened. You know what I mean? So in essence, a fictional version of US history was really being told here. So that social studies, we see that it was a top-down, quote-unquote, way to ensure social control. So the US educational system is really flawed and distorted due to having that one perspective, that uniform perspective, no one else, no other vantage points, just this single view with the aim to get your mind to assimilate. Your mind assimilate, you assimilate. That's an obvious statement, but it's so true. Okay, so check out this video here on why people fall for misinformation. Is very pertinent. Okay, you guys check it out and enjoy.
In 1901, David Honig published a paper that forever changed our understanding of taste. His research led to what we know today as the taste map, an illustration that divides the tongue into 4 separate areas. According to this map, receptors at the tip of our tongues capture sweetness. Bitterness is detected at the tongue's base, and along the sides, receptors capture salty and sour sensations. Since its invention, the taste map has been published in textbooks and newspapers. The only problem with this map is that it's wrong. In fact, it's not even an accurate representation of what Honig originally discovered. The tongue map is a common misconception, something widely believed but largely incorrect. So where do misconceptions like this come from, and what makes a fake fact so easy to believe? It's true that the tongue map's journey begins with David Honig. As part of his dissertation at Leipzig University, Honig analyzed taste sensitivities across the tongue for the 4 basic flavors. Using sucrose for sweet, quinine sulfate for bitter, hydrochloric acid for sour, and salt for salty, Honig applied these stimuli to compare differences in taste thresholds across a subject's tongue. He hoped to better understand the physiological mechanisms that affected these 4 flavors, and his data suggested that sensitivity for each taste did in fact vary across the tongue. The maximum sensation for sweet was located at the tongue's tip. Bitter flavors were strongest at the back, salt was strongest in this area, and sour at the middle of the tongue's sides. But Honig was careful to note that every sensation could also be tasted across the tongue, and that the areas he identified offered very small variations in intensity. Like so many misconceptions, the tongue map represents a distortion of its original source. However, the nature of that distortion can vary. Some misconceptions are comprised of disinformation, false information intentionally designed to mislead people. But many misconceptions, including the tongue map, center on misinformation, false or misleading information that results from unintentional inaccuracy. Misinformation is most often shaped by mistakes and human error, but the specific mistakes that lead to a misconception can be surprisingly varied. In the case of the tongue map, Honig's dissertation was written in German, meaning the paper could only be understood by readers fluent in German and well-versed in Honig's small corner of academia. This kicked off a game of telephone that reshaped Honig's research every time it was shared with outside parties. Less than a decade after his dissertation, newspapers were falsely insisting that experiments could prove sweetness was imperceptible on the back of the tongue. The second culprit behind the tongue map's spread were the images that Henig's work inspired. In 1912, a rough version of the map appeared in a newspaper article that cautiously described some of the mysteries behind taste and smell research. Featuring clear labels across the tongue, the article's illustration simplified Henig's more complicated original diagrams. Variations of this approachable image became repeatedly cited, often without credit or nuanced consideration for Henig's work. Eventually, this image spread to textbooks and classrooms as a purported truth of how we experience taste. But perhaps the factor that most contributed to this misconception was its narrative simplicity. In many ways, the map complements our desire for clear stories about the world around us, a quality not always present in the sometimes messy fields of science. For example, even the number of tastes we have is more complicated than Henig's work suggests. Umami, also known as savory, is now considered the fifth basic taste, and many still debate the existence of tastes like fatty, alkaline, metallic, and water-like. Once we hear a good story, it can be difficult to change how we see that information, even in the face of new evidence. So, next time you see a convenient chart or read a surprising anecdote, try to maintain a healthy skepticism, because misconceptions can leave a bitter taste on every part of your tongue. Did you know that 70% of statistics are made up, including this one? How can we avoid being tricked by statistics when they're so persuasive and make complex data digestible? Check out this video about Simpson's paradox and learn how to make sense of statistics.
Okay, so why do people fall for misinformation? Well, let's go back to 1901. That's that progressive era right off the bat right there. Okay, the crux of the problem is misconceptions, the misconception of things. Now, there you have it, a distortion from the original source. That's a misconception right there. That's why I mentioned a distortion in my previous videos, because that misconception had happened right there. So disinformation or unintentional inaccuracy is a rampant problem, and it has been a rampant problem. And those are things that screws everything up from the time it happens moving forward if you don't correct it. Now, most people, they aren't well versed in the info that they take in, and that really leads to the unintentional inaccuracies that propagate from the source moving forward. And one problem that the media have and has right now is simplification of things. Things are more complex. They don't see the gray area in things. It's either black or white. And when things are black and white like that, you disregard the gray in issues, then that's when you can see inaccuracies creep up and misconceptions start to pop up in droves. And it's funny because in this video they mention the game of telephone and how it's being played, but that's true, and it's being played on a very large scale. So the nuances of the information, going back to this tongue example, the taste buds and things, the nuances of this information is dropped, and they take in or embrace the simplicity of things, as I mentioned earlier. And so now you have this misconception that's being propagated by the media and more people, and the educational system, academia, they take it in and start to teach it, and it's like a rinse and repeat. And then it's even on a larger scale. So now the narrative simplicity, that's the problem, because we seem to be really drawn to that narrative simplicity. So we would rather embrace a good story because that is something that's easier to accept over the truthful nuance that actually occurs. And that's kind of a danger right there. So people, they have a hard time accepting or learning things, and they even have a bigger issue learning to relearn what they have already taken in, and I guess they're set in their ways. But that need or that desire to hear a good story, that overpowers people even when they're looking dead at concrete facts and evidence right there. Even when it's staring them in the face, they just don't want to let go of that story that they've taken in, that simple story, that narrative simplicity right there. Okay guys, it's almost that time, but I want to let you guys know that in the description I will put the links to the 2 videos that I reacted to, so that you guys can check everything out without interruption. This video segment here on psychology and misinformation, this is me being proactive because, like, if you have tuned in to my previous videos, you see that I'm dealing with history, and this history that I'm dealing with is it's nothing new. I'm not bringing anything new to the table. The only thing that I am doing is setting the record straight. Now, it may seem like I'm being controversial only because we've gone too far. The pendulum has swung too far over on the other side, man. It's not even balanced. So when that pendulum has swung too far over on one side, then when you try to rectify it or balance things, it's gonna seem like you're being unfair or unjust to a certain party of people. And that's what we're gonna see today. You're gonna see troll comments, you're gonna probably see some reaction videos, but people really have to comprehend that a shift happened. There was truthful information, and then we know that all of this stuff was manufactured and built up to what we see in our present day. And I'm definitely going to speak on the progressive era, 1900 or maybe even 1890 or 1880 all the way to 1920, Woodrow Wilson's presidency. And he's not the only one. That you can't have just one person and overturn all of this established information. It was a concerted effort, and there's many players, many players, and it has been propagated worldwide, man. All this misinformation, trust me on that. And we're gonna dwell on that, but facts and evidence, that is what beats out misinformation. Facts, evidence, and we have to get our discernment up too, because the campaign isn't just on what we take in, but how we think also. And we can see that in this clown world that we are living in presently, man. But basically, to get to the point, our people, melanated people, quote unquote black people, we've been shut out of history, man. We've been relegated to one part of the continent of Africa. That's what has been taught. That's the misinformation right there. And I'm not cocky. This thing is bigger than me, so I can't be cocky. I was under this I guess intellectual fog also. I mean, I went to public school, and I was taught this garbage. I learned more outside of school when I graduated, and I am learning more. But basically, man, this is for our people, man. Quote unquote black people, to know where we came from, the impact that we have had throughout history. I mean, it didn't just start with slavery in the U.S., man. Shoot, It started well before that. Yeah, our impact is far greater than what is being taught in this public school educational system right here and worldwide. But again, this is part 2 of the psychological series. There will be more psychological videos. Like, subscribe to the channel, share, and I'll see you later.